pretty tough to follow so much bribery so early in the morning. But whoever I see smiling the most during my presentation, whoever claps the loudest and does lots of woohoos, you will have your choice of going to Paris for a weekend with either Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie. It's up to you. So, are we pumped up for Spark? Yeah. Come on. Are we pumped up for energy data? Yes. Are we pumped up for the Green Bay Packers? Okay. So, just so you understand a little bit about me, I am from Bucks County, England, as you can probably tell, and I work in Manhattan. I used to live there as well. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But then I moved to New Jersey without realizing that I then became a complete social pariah in Manhattan. But I'm living with the consequences of that right now. So what I'm going to talk about today is how software can transform energy strategies. And I think the big question is really, but will it happen? Because since 2008, Verdantix has been benchmarking different energy and carbon management software solutions. So, we've really watched this market over the last 7 years evolve. And it is a constant battle, I think, to get the value proposition across to people who, are in finance roles, maybe operational roles, who don't completely understand energy. So, let's just, make that clear. And I know many of you in the room are familiar. Who is familiar with Verdantix? Who's participated? Wow. Okay. So I will keep this very, very short. So thank you for participating in our research. We're our independent research and consulting firm, as probably most of you know, headquartered in London. Also had an office in New York for the last 4 years. So what I think the theme is, and maybe kind of speaking to something that is in everyone's minds, is that we are the ecosystem. This conference, probably more than many others, is actually an ecosystem of partners. And we've all actually got a similar mission, which is, how can we convince people that a data-driven approach can just be incredibly powerful for energy consumers? And I think there is a call to action, right, which is we've got to make it happen. We are the people who have to make it happen. We are the people who are pushing forward these ideas, the technology innovations, the different services. And so to kind of set the stage here, I'm going to answer these 3 questions for you. So I'm going to be sharing quite a lot of our survey data that we collect, and appreciate all the time that many of you have put into working with us on that. And then look at some of the technology enablers and services capabilities in the market. And then just a quick wrap up on what do we need to do? What actions do we need to take given what's going on in the market? So let me get started. Over the last 7 or 8 years that we've been looking at this space, we've really seen 3 core drivers that we need to stay focused on. So firstly, higher electricity prices. If you look in markets that have higher electricity prices and expectations of increases, you're going to see more innovation around data-driven strategies. Secondly, more complex energy systems. So I'll talk about that in quite some detail. And then thirdly, which ties in, I think, with the theme that we have here that Eric was talking about in terms of sustainability, some new risks that are impacting power supply. So let me get started with the higher electricity prices. It probably comes as no surprise to anybody here that increasing cost of energy in every survey that we've ever asked people about in terms of investing in energy management, that is always going to be the number one. And you can see actually when people are asked to prioritize, and this was a survey that's actually just coming out this month, we interviewed 131 energy and facilities managers in industrial firms. And top 3 are all about cost. So I see nodding heads, validating everything that you're seeing all the time. What about a drill down then into connecting that with energy software and cost savings, again, surprise, surprise, from this focus group of 17 people we interviewed for our recent Green Quadrant study. They're also saying, well, that's always the number one reason why we can get funding. Now, you could say the good news is that in our global energy survey, so this is data from around 16 countries around the world, 52% of respondents said, we're going to have to spend more on our electricity and natural gas next year. So, that's good, although in a way we would prefer that 100% of people were saying they were going to have to spend more, right? Because then there's more of an incentive. So, kind of building on the theme here in terms of the kind of prizes, what I wanted to ask everyone about is your understanding of the price elasticity of demand of electricity. So does everyone understand the concept, at least, of price elasticity? Does everyone kind of, so I could get a bit nerdy here, having done 8 years of economics. So the point is, if electricity prices increased 1% this year, and all of the energy buyers who knew that, by what amount would they decrease their energy consumption in 2016? Okay, so I'll give everyone a few seconds to think about it. So everyone knows it's gone up by 1%. By how much would people decrease? So the answer is actually 0.12% in the first year after that. And if you apply that then to the US market, that has some pretty major ramifications in terms of what kind of change you can expect. Because we did a study looking at Hawaii where there are obviously massive issues about the cost of energy because they have to import so much and it's very expensive. So in Hawaii, because of the growth rate of electricity prices, they're actually trying to reduce consumption by 0.9% a year because they can see those costs going up. But you see the challenge that we have in the rest of the US is that the compound annual growth rate has been so low. And this, fundamentally, when you think about that survey data, is the big challenge we all face because there is not enough pressure coming down on buyers of energy because that level of increase means that every year they're only trying to reduce consumption by 0.16%. Okay, so this is bad data for us to see. If we look at a different market, so in the UK, it's much more like Hawaii. It's not quite so bad, but if you look at the compound annual growth rate for whether it's commercial customers or industrial, what you can see is prices are already higher and there are expectations that they will keep going up. So what does this mean? There's a much more innovation taking place in the UK market because for all energy buyers, there's just much more pressure on them to do something about the problem. And this is why it's quite good to step back and think about some of these laws of economics, because it means if you're operating in different markets, you have to look at prices and you have to look at expectations of price rises, and that will help you understand which market segments to focus on. So let's look then at the second area, more complex energy systems. Now, if you go back to 1995, when I think the Rolling Stones released Voodoo Lounge, which I don't think was one of their best albums of all time, but I did buy it, there wasn't a lot of wind power or solar around. I mean, this is 20 years ago. There was just not a lot going on. There weren't any Tesla EVs. There weren't any EVs really, apart from some kind of oddball vehicles. You didn't have a residential energy power wall. There weren't Nest thermostats. You didn't have a lot of smart meters. There wasn't a lot of LED lighting. There was really very little demand response. So that was just 20 years ago. So it's really interesting to think about how many new technologies have been deployed since then. And the way we think about it at Verdantix is to try and classify these energy systems and kind of describe them, because they have similar assets, they have similar governance, they have similar processes, similar requirements, for instance, for power quality. So single site real estate, that could be, say, the Empire State Building. You've got data centers and telecoms towers. Think about, say, AT&T and Google, the issues they have. Great example of that was actually SAP, who had these greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals, and actually their greenhouse gas emissions went up something like 27% last year because of all of the cloud computing they're doing. Think about a municipality like Boulder, who have basically tried to go off-grid because they're all a bunch of crazy green people who don't want to be associated in any way with fossil fuels. So lots of changes happening there. And the interesting thing, kind of connecting with the core mission of Virginet, is around the utility bill management. And what does that complexity actually mean in terms of utility bill management? So you might think, well, if you are a small company, it's not very complex to do your utility billing, because you don't have to interact with a lot of different utilities. And I think, is it 2,500 utilities that you've integrated with? 2,600. So, a smaller firm, maybe it's not an issue, but of course you don't have the expertise, maybe you don't have the time, you don't have the dedicated energy managers to deal with that. Now, I was at the ENERNOC conference a couple of years ago, and they put up an amazing pie chart. ENERNOC, only 13%, I think, of their customers actually have energy in their job title. Just shows, how little dedicated staff there are. And then you think about large organizations, and they may have the staff, but then they start running into these complexity challenges. So, if you think about the small firms have the resource challenge, and the larger firms have this complexity challenge, everybody needs some kind of help to really collect high quality data and do something about it. And don't just kind of take my brain ache chart here as the basis for it, because here's some of our survey data from our survey of 285 heads of energy around the world, and you can see 29% say we are already using an outsourced provider for energy data, so interval data, and then you've got 21% saying we're already using an outsourced provider for utility bill management. If you then look at the legend at the bottom, you've got very high percentages saying, and we plan to outsource as well. We're looking at this. And it's because of either that resource challenge or because of the complexity challenge. Is there somebody here from Johnson Controls? Maybe in the other room. So, a great example of a data-driven energy strategy was the refit of the Empire State Building. So there's tons of, it's quite easy to market your energy project, right, with this kind of iconic building involved. But it was fundamentally, the business case was actually based on having multi-tenant billing in place. So I don't think they could have kind of gone through, the whole business and the investment, which was huge, running into tens of millions of dollars to refurb the Empire State Building without that business case. Think about data centers as well. So going back to the UK, so one of our clients in the UK is actually doing fascinating work with data centers, turning their UPS systems and their diesel backup into assets so that they can sell power back into the grid. That's great, of course, but you need pretty sophisticated data management systems to be able to understand when you can do that, and also to be able to monetize the investment. Anybody from ENERNOC here? Okay, great, hi. So, demand response, another great example. I was happy to visit the Eninoc NOC, the NOC part of Eninoc up in Boston, and just see the huge volume of data that is required to run an effective demand response program. And clearly, if you are going to be taking that peak load out of the market, then the data management requirements of that to get it right are really important. And actually, going back to a conversation I had at the Eninoc event, I was talking to somebody from an unnamed university in the region, and he was saying, well, actually this demand response thing isn't working that great for us. I said, wow, tell me more. What's the problem? He said, well, we're a little bit paranoid about what would happen the first time that a request came in to cut the load. So we overfilled the diesel, and we had this huge diesel spill. And that actually wiped out all of the savings for the first 18 months of being in the DR program. So some unanticipated consequences happening there. So let's turn and look from a utility point of view, right? So we just benchmarked a range of IT services firms, and we said, what kind of services are you providing? And we interviewed 15 different utilities in the US and Canada. And you can see, again, this question of, we're drowning in data effectively because of these more complex systems that are being put in place. But then, here are some quotes from some of the interviewees. The US utility talking about meters to cash, so really monetizing the data that they've got. And then another one actually looking more at the kind of mobility angle of things. And I think there are some interesting activities going on with firms like Verasay in that space. So the third piece I just want to pick up is bigger risks to power supply. And this is, of course, the best stadium for the best team in the NFL. And I mean, even with those yellow goalposts, if the lights went out, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But clearly, if you hire Beyonce to sing at halftime in the 2013 Super Bowl, it obviously created some kind of fault in the power circuits at the Superdome. And I think all of us, who are watching the game, it's just kind of, I mean, I haven't made up this photograph. That is actually what it looked like, if everyone can think back to 2.5 years ago. So kind of just to summarize it, just to make it totally clear, that's the good data bit, and that is the bad data bit. And the scary thing is that, nobody really could explain what exactly the problem was. They were using 4,600 megawatts of power. So the great thing is, so that's obviously a very complex system. We all know that that's not going to happen again, right? Because being down, without enough illumination for the Super Bowl for 23 minutes isn't going to happen. So I was in a bar in Chelsea. I'm not a big baseball fan, but one of my friends had invited me out. Daniel Murphy wasn't doing so well. Actually, one of the Verdantix analysts now is a data analyst for the Mets, amazingly. So we're watching the game, and then what happens? Oh dear, okay. So, it wasn't the stadium lighting this time. It was actually some problem with the power for the broadcaster. So, this is just the volume of people and the complex systems that we have. You need data to be able to manage things well and to understand what went wrong. A more personal story. So, as I said, I used to live in the East Village. And that's more or less where I live, not quite as close to Gramercy Park as I would have liked, but that's basically the map I have. And this is actually a screenshot I took from Con Ed in Hurricane Sandy when I didn't have any power. So I obviously had found some power after that, but these are all of the outage information. So you can see the date is October the 30th, and customers, that actually is not, an individual residence. That could be, a block with 400 apartments in it, given that everyone in Manhattan lives in a shoebox. So, this was not very satisfying to me, I have to say, as somebody who lived very near one of the substations that blew up, that had a chicken wire fence as its flood defense from the East River. So, this, I think, really brought it home for me in terms of the criticality of energy data. So let's move quickly on to technology enablers. And, we've just been talking about the energy systems that are, getting more and more complex. And the great thing is, and I know many of you are, here in the room today who've featured in our Green Quadrant benchmark, and it's a huge amount of work for us, and I also recognize it's a massive amount of work for other people. So thank you for working with us on that. The great news is that UrgentNet is enabling a lot of the software applications to do a superb job in terms of the analysis and the various aspects of managing and optimizing facilities. And so, we can actually, do a drill down and say, well, who are sorry, probably gone a bit too, who are the firms who've got the really strong energy data management capabilities. So, we've got a huge amount of detail here in our assessment of, who's able to deliver what. And then you can also get into these questions around what are you actually doing with that data? And, again, I think UrgentNet is doing an amazing job of helping software vendors to focus on the analysis and delivering and clarifying value. So, whether you're looking at utility bill management, the monitoring and targeting obviously been really important. Maintenance, is something that is becoming a bigger part of the proposition, reporting and so on. So managing these complex systems is actually pulling in a lot of the big services firms to build out their services capabilities. So if you look at Schneider Electric, having bought Summit Energy and then created a much bigger services organization to help deliver solutions into their customer base, or recently Accenture buying Energy Quote JHA in the UK market. Again, it's a services firm saying, we actually feel, we need to pull together all of these different aspects of the capability. And so you can see within this context that our view is that you've still got that data collection and translation, the network monitoring, another kind of data-related activity, and then the software as the platform that is required to be successful with all of the more complex projects. I'm not going to go through this in detail because I think everyone will get a bit of brain ache. But this is the way we've been able to segment out the different services capabilities that are required, and then to provide a whole kind of framework to do some self-analysis if you're a services firm, or if you're an in-house group, to understand how many of these things can I do, and how many of these things do I need to outsource to get help with. So, it is complex stuff, and that's the point of these slides here. So just kind of wrap up here with the final few points. We've seen the landscape change a lot in terms of technology enablement. If you go back to 2009, 2010, I think a lot of software vendors were saying, we are going to deliver the whole solution to our customers. And I think that mindset has changed a lot over the last 3 to 4 years. Because now what we're really seeing is people say, this is so complex, we actually need a whole ecosystem to work together to deliver the solution. So we're going to work with a firm like UrgentNet on the data collection and cleansing and delivery. And then we are going to deploy some software to do the analysis, do monitoring and controls. But we're actually still going to have to work with services firms as well to kind of do the last few yards do all of the work. And so we see a lot of product max for software moving in that direction. And so if we just answer the last question, this is some analysis that we did in terms of the business case for the software. And so this is just for a hypothetical firm. So you can see they've got 145 sites in year 0, and then it's slowly growing. And then they implement the software over a period of 4 years, 20%, then 50%, and so on. Their energy spend is going up slightly, and then you've got a kind of fixed cost in terms of the cost of implementing the software. So the great news is that our objective analysis, and this is based on a lot of research we've done over several years, is that you're going to find virtually all organizations are going to get a pretty good payback. Payback period of 2 to 3 years. Everyone should be happy, right? But we're running into, again, this issue about where's the money going to come from, and why is this going to be funded as opposed to, let's say, building a new distribution center or upgrading your transport fleet. And that is really the biggest issue we see time and time again. Now, I know that everyone's probably a big fan of Back to the Future, and the flux capacitor was the key thing that enabled the DeLorean to go and go back to the past and then come to the future again, or however you want to talk about it. When I go back to some of our old survey data, the sad thing is for all of us, and we have to accept this is what's going on, we, in 2012, and I could go back to 2008, had exactly the same responses as what is the #1 reason why we are not getting these energy management, energy efficiency value propositions funded. And so I think we all need to get together. We need to make it happen. This is a story I really loved. It's actually from Australia. It's not a bunch of vandals trying to trash a subway car. It's actually 50 commuters saving someone's life because he'd fallen between the train and the track. He later on laughed about it and said, I was standing right next to the mind the gap sign. So he'd been a bit embarrassed by that. But 50 commuters pushed this subway carriage so the guy could escape. Okay, so I'm not saying that energy management is, in a life or death situation, but I am saying with the ecosystem of people that we have here today, we have to have this mentality of we all have to push together to make it happen, to kind of overcome the problems that we identify in our research. We're obviously making a lot of progress, but I think by working together, we will make even more. So with that, thank you all very much.
Questions? Maybe Pratik will have to have you kind of model the T-shirts. Can you wait for the mic? Here we go.
Hey there, my name is Claire Naseby, and I do consulting for mainly higher ed on energy data, utility bill data, and energy management. And I guess my question to you is, in your presentation, you talk about us pushing together and working together. The thing that I've found for the end user when they're trying to pull all these services together is that they don't really understand what those pieces are and those different languages. So I guess my question to you is, who provides that translation piece in order to incorporate the Urginet and the energy management system and the dashboard and the data management and then the data software that needs to go in those buildings? Who can pull that all in together and commission that system to provide that customer that ultimate product that works and can provide that accurate data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one of the hurdles that we've seen in the market. And if you think about the issue has been maybe I'll get something thrown at me, but if you take firms like, say, Schneider Electric and Honeywell, in the past there's definitely been this kind of we sell boxes type mentality, right? And there's only what I've been told, over a drink. And so the challenge has been for the end users is they're having to assemble all of these things. And the point is, I kind of associate it with like paper clips. So why do no companies have a big, paperclip cost reduction plan? Right? Because paperclips don't really feature as being a major cost category, and so it doesn't really matter. And in a lot of organizations, energy was like that for a long time. So you didn't have the people within the organization who had the skill set and the expertise to kind of pull it all together and then kind of pitch these propositions to the CFO. But as energy prices have gone up, as the complexity has increased, and as these questions about risk and resilience have become more important, suddenly it's a much more complex problem that needs to be dealt with. And so even on the supplier side, I mean, you would expect it's going to be the Schneider Electrics, the Accentures, the Siemens building solution. So any kind of large system integrator with a consulting skill set should be doing that. But I think those propositions and solutions are still being fully matured. And it's partly because the customers are also a little bit slow in terms of understanding and being willing to fund their propositions.
Hi, I'm Michael Britt with Southern Company. I have a question about the price elasticity of demand for electricity. It sounded like it was a 1% price increase yielded how much of a decrease in demand?
Yeah, so this is it's actually a study from the
Also.
yeah it's a study from the US EIA from last year. And so, well, they've modeled it basically. So if prices increase 1% this year, in 2016, organizations will try to reduce by 0.12%. So in other words, it's like a tenth basically of whatever the increase was. Yeah.
Any implications to draw from that?
Well, I think, and it does actually accumulate over time. So, I mean, it's a really interesting study. I know, probably not everyone's so thrilled about kind of economic analysis as me, but it's so profound, right, for the whole market because it says every economic actor out there, this is how in aggregate they're going to respond. What it basically means, I think, is that if you have low price increases, as most of the US does have, there is a very low response rate from organizations, and especially the CFO, because it goes back to my whole paperclips point. He kind of looks at it and says, it's not costing much now, it's not going up much, can you just try and dial it down a little bit, and we're done. And that, is the kind of mentality that I think we all have to fight against by kind of characterizing the challenges as being, it's the Super Bowl, the lights are going out type of thing. Or the Empire State type story.
I'm Parker Mott from Enernoc, Corporate Development Strategy. I wanted to build upon the previous question. So it sounds to me then like we're relatively inelastic in how much we're willing to cut our energy use with increase in price. How do you look at that in comparison with one of the bar charts that you had up, which said, look, one of the primary reasons to invest in energy management is around concern with increasing costs. So it sounds like there's a natural conflict there. I don't feel like I can control my energy spend or the amount of energy that I use. Similarly, though, I'm really worried about it and thinking maybe I should invest in a tool to get more insight.
Yeah. I think that's it. That is the challenge that in our minds we all have to think about smarter ways of dealing with it, which is not a head-on discussion with the CFO about costs. Because, if I go back over 7 years of survey data and everyone is just saying, energy management is all about cost reduction, fine. But the CFO looks at it and he says, you know what, it's not costing us very much and I don't really care. And I think, one of the things that brought it home to me was I was at a Linklaters, one of the big global law firms event, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. and they had somebody from one of the big banks saying, I've done an amazing job, and I basically saved the company $200,000 over the last 18 months on, energy stuff. And, I didn't say it, but I was thinking, well, geez, if you fired one trader, you could have, got 10x that, right? Yeah. And so I think what we often find at Verdantix, the finance people have low energy IQ, and the energy people have low finance IQ. And it's just really important for all of us to kind of fix that problem through educating the finance people, but also ourselves, that we are doing a better job of communicating on the big issues. And that's why we like to big up the question into complexity and resilience, and not just be focused on costs. Yeah, question at the front here.
Yeah, Renee Spey, I'm with Coppervale. We're a boutique energy analysis management company,
Okay.
A small one. Again, building on the question, kind of challenging you, some of the things you said. So we have cost increases, we have complexity, and we have reliability. I'm saying that really all boils down to cost. So reliability or lack thereof translates into cost. Complexity or not understanding it and therefore having certain actions happen translates into cost. So our job as energy management people really is to bring to the CFOs solutions that have acceptable ROI. If they don't have acceptable ROI, they're probably not worth doing.
Right. So I think brought up a number of great things there. So I think there has to be a cost discussion. I mean, there just has to be, right? So fine. The big issue, and I mean, maybe I didn't feature it so much, the data point that keeps coming back to haunt all of us is there is a positive ROI, that's great, but compared to the ROI of other things, it's not interesting to the CFO. I'll give you a great example. I worked for a couple of years at BT, the big telecoms company, and so I stayed in touch with some people, and they had a really inspirational head of energy, Richard Tarberton. He said to me, his discussion with the CFO was basically, here are all my ideas about what we should do. We're a technology company, cloud computing, our energy consumption's going like this. The CEO's got all these commitments about greenhouse gas emissions, so we've got to pull those down. And the CFO basically said, very complicated, what are the 3 biggest buildings? Do those. Right? And that's BT. BT consumes 0.7% of electricity in the UK. And that is the airtime and the kind of quality of discussion that he'd basically had. So I think it's a huge error for us to say, look at this wonderful ROI and look at the short payback period, because for the finance guys, it's not big enough. And until electricity costs are going up, it doesn't drive enough pain for the CFO, because they're thinking about energy costs as how does it affect earnings per share. And if it's almost infinitesimally small, they don't care. Sorry to be negative, but our job is to deliver the facts in a kind of unalloyed way.
Yeah, I'm Bob. I'm Bob Bittner with Dude Solutions, Facility Dude and School Dude market brands. I'm really glad you pointed out the item of the communication error between the CFO and energy managers or facility managers, because I think that's really key, because we go into it with very different mindsets and we don't communicate to them, and it's really about how we build the story. And I think you're spot on about they could care less about a more efficient chiller, but if you talk to them about if you're going to have production may go down if we lose this chiller, and I want to finance it through energy savings, then you have much better response to relating it to the business that they're in than as a facility manager, I want to save energy. Yeah. And that you really have to get to the bottom line of the business. No commercial business, industrial business out there other than the utility companies are in business to make or use energy. and so they don't care about it. I mean, I think you're right on.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And I love the company name, by the way. I wish I'd come up with that. Any final questions? Someone in the back?
Hi, my name is Ranta. I work for the Coca-Cola Company. Could you describe some success stories of how you were able to overcome that challenge of the CFO expects a 20% return? You think an energy project might yield 8 to 10%. So, what I mean, you're telling me in a way, you're saying that if you talk about resilience and speak to the complexity of issue, that might help. I'm pretty skeptical of that. I'm just curious. So, what are some specific ways that you've been able to overcome that challenge?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm here. I'm fully bought into this sector, so I'm not skeptical about it. You know, it's we see lots of great projects happening. I would say the majority of them will connect some kind of energy reduction benefit with some other aspect of the business case, right? So let's say there's a great example of Diageo, the spirits company. They've done a lot of work around waste to energy, right? And so those are big projects. You're talking about maybe a $50 million investment. And that's interesting to the CFO because he's like, okay, this is an interesting project for me to deal with. You know, we're not down in the weeds, the $200,000 energy cost saving. It's a nice CapEx project. It's interesting. There's some financing there. You know, there's a sort of 15-year contract. We can do some off-balance sheet stuff. So, you know, that would be, you know, an example of people thinking creatively and, you know, more expansively about let's have a big project here with a big payback and a big ticket that is going to get the attention of the CFO. So what I'm saying that the real problem is if you're going in with these smaller propositions which are entirely focused around energy costs and you're not associating it with, say, maintenance or let's say with real estate. So good example, IBM bought software from Tririga and used that to basically reduce their real estate costs, tens of millions of dollars of saving. And they were so happy, they then bought Tririga, the software company, right? Because they said, well, you know, geez, it's worked so well for us. You know, we actually want to, you know, own that software asset because we can then sell it as a proposition to other people. And so what they've been successful with was saying, let's start with real estate where there's some really big savings. You talk to the head of real estate and then you can get access to the CFO. But then after that, let's go to each facility and deploy some of this energy management facility level software. So, you know, what I'm saying is when we need to push, let's not keep pushing the same arguments. Let's push some bigger new arguments that connect energy cost savings with some other things.